All right, hello class. Thank you so much for joining me today. So the first big project that we're going to do in this class is going to be to try to understand the fundamentals of labor supply and labor demand, which is going to allow us to think carefully about how things like changes in technology or immigration or welfare policy changes are going to affect wages and affect employment. And we're going to start with that today by laying out a basic theory about labor supply decisions, which is to say we're going to think about how people decide how much to work and whether to work, given things like the wages that they're being offered, the difficulty, the cost of commuting, the structure of welfare benefits, etc., all of the things that influence that choice. Now, what we're going to do today is in some ways going to be a review of Econ 250, although my experience is that even people who just took Econ 250 with me generally tend to appreciate having a chance to review. So, in order to think about labor supply decisions using economic theory, we're going to attack this problem the same way we would attack any consumer choice problem. Right? Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to assume that people have preferences, they decide what to choose by thinking about all of their possibilities and picking whichever one is best according to however they personally make decisions, right? What they personally value. So in order to work this out, in order to think about this, we have to first of all identify the core trade-off people make when they decide how much to work, think about what options people have available to them, and then finally think about what their preferences are and how to model their decision to choose whatever is best out of their available options. Okay, so first of all, what's the core trade-off when we think about labor supply decisions? We'll want to think about, if you're deciding how much time to spend at work, what's the benefit of spending more time at work? What's the cost of spending more time at work? So the core benefit, right, the main reason that people work is because by working you get money, right? The benefit is, right, you get money. Now, when we say that the benefit is that you get money, we don't really fundamentally care about the money itself, right? What we care about is that we can buy stuff with the money, right? We're not all Scrooge McDucks just diving into a bathtub full of cash. We want to buy groceries. We want to, buy concert tickets, not during COVID, right? We want to buy Netflix, et cetera, right? So we're going to get money that we're going to use to buy stuff. This is the major benefit we get from spending time at work. On the other hand, what's the disadvantage of spending time at work? Right? Why would you ever decide to go home if every minute that you spend at work puts more money in your pocket? Well, the obvious disadvantage, right, the major disadvantage, is that the time you spend at work is time that you could spend doing something else. Right? If you weren't at work, you could be hanging out with your friends, again, maybe on Zoom, right? You could be cleaning your apartment, you could be cooking dinner, you could be skydiving, right? So the cost is, right, you lose time. You spend time working when you probably rather spend that time doing something else. Right? Could be studying for this class. So we're basically going to take these two things, right, the stuff that you want to buy and the stuff that you'd like to do with your time if you weren't at work, and lump them into two catch-all goods, which we'll call consumption and leisure. Important point about these goods is that both leisure and consumption really contain a whole bunch of different stuff and a bunch of different activities all into the same category. So when we think about your preferences for leisure and your preferences for consumption, we're going to think about this as, how much you value an hour of leisure is really how much you value the best thing you could do with that hour of leisure, whatever that is for you, right? Whether that's flying a kite or walking a dog or watching a movie, right? And when we think about your value for consumption, it's going to be the exact same thing, right? It's going to be the best use of your next dollar for you. Whether for you, that means spending that dollar on groceries, spending that dollar on, novelty pillows, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so this means that we're going to model our decisions about how much labor to supply, right, how much time we spend working, by thinking about a trade-off between two different goods that we value, right? Consumption, which is effectively stuff that costs money, and time, right, or leisure. So the next step is going to be to think about how much we can afford, right? What our budget is for stuff versus time. So let's imagine, right? So our goal is to write down budget constraints. So let's start with a fairly simple situation. Let's imagine that you have 24 hours a day. And you can work as much as you want, let's say on TaskRabbit, for $10 an hour. Right? On top of that, in addition to your work, you also get $60 a day from your eccentric wealthy uncle, regardless of what you do, right? So our goal is to think about how much leisure and what combinations of leisure and consumption we can afford, given that this is the situation we're in, right? We're going to think about this graphically, right, by thinking about everything within a budget constraint defined by these two goods. Great. So to start off with, let's think about some extremes, right? Let's think about how much consumption you could afford if you just spent every available resource trying to get money, right? Trying to be able to buy stuff. So what's the absolute most consumption that you could afford? The absolute most consumption right, would be the $60 that you get from your uncle, plus your earnings from working all of the time, right? So plus your wage of $10 an hour times 24 hours a day, right? So that's going to be 60 plus 240 is 300 units of consumption. And we'll talk about dollars and units of consumption interchangeably, because we'll just define consumption as the amount of stuff you can buy for $1, right? So if we spend all of our resources on consumption, we can afford up to $300 worth of stuff a day. How about if we spent the absolute most, right? Try to get as much leisure as we possibly could. Well, in this case, right, the absolute most leisure we can get is what we get from not working at all, in which case we get 24 hours of leisure. When we spend 24 hours partying, right, we don't work at all, how much consumption do we have? Well, we're not going to end up with no consumption, right, because we can still spend the $60 we got from our uncle, right? So we'll end up somewhere like this, right? This is our choice if we get as much leisure as we possibly can. Okay, great. So how about the intermediates? Is there any way that we can define all of the set of choices, right, between these two extremes? Well, the way that I like to do this, the way that I like to think about this, is to think about how much consumption I can afford for some given amount of leisure that I take, right? So we can say, how much consumption can I afford? Is going to be the money that I make from working, right, which is going to be $10 times the number of hours I spend working, right, which is 24 minus L. And then plus the money I get without having to work for it, right, plus 60. Right? So I can make this C equals 10 times 24 minus 10 times L plus 60. And then I personally, this is a completely valid description of all of my options. I personally prefer to bring this minus 10L over to the other side to make this look more like a normal budget constraint. Then we can say C plus 10L equals 10 times 24 plus 60. Right? We want to graph this. This is just going to be a line, right? Going from 300 and 0. Ooh, terrible line. It's going to be a line like this, right, with the slope equal to 10. Right? Every hour of leisure costs me 10 units of consumption. Wonderful. So what we've got here, right, is a budget constraint. just like the budget constraint we'd have for any other two types of goods, right? If we had apples and bananas, we'd end up with a budget that looks very similar to this. So I'm just going to take one moment to belabor some of those similarities. What we have over here is effectively our income, right? Our total income. Why is this our total income? Well, it's the number of dollars that we have, plus the dollar value of the time that we own, right? I own 24 hours a day. I can trade those hours in for dollars at a price of $10 an hour. So collectively, those hours are worth $240 denominated in dollars, right? The $60 from my uncle, of course, just worth $60 denominated in dollars. So my total income is $300. How can I spend that income? Well, there's two things that I can spend it on, right? One thing that I can spend it on is consumption. I can buy stuff for it. How much does $1 worth of consumption cost me? Cost me $1, right? So I've got a price of consumption, just like you'd have a price of apples, that's just always equal to 1. What else can I do with my total income, right? Which includes both hours of the day and also dollars. Well, I can also spend it relaxing, partying, right? I can spend it in leisure. How much does an hour of leisure cost me in dollars? An hour of leisure costs me $10, right? This is the price of leisure. This is the price of consumption, right? Why does an hour of leisure cost me $10? Because if I hadn't spent that time engaging in leisure, right, cleaning my toilet, talking to my friends, etc., I could have spent it at work earning money. Great. So this means that we can think about these prices, right? Our wage rate as the price of leisure, one is the price of consumption, the same way we can think about any other sets of prices, right? We can say that the cost of an hour of our time in terms of consumption is W. We can think that the cost of a unit of consumption in terms of time is going to be 1 over W, right? In other words, spending $10 on a burrito costs me an hour of time at work. Great. The only thing about this budget constraint that's a little bit weird is that we have this really unfortunate physical constraint where we can't convert dollars into time past 24 hours a day, right? We can't take any of those hours from our uncle and slow down the rotation of the earth a little bit so we can spend a little bit more time playing frisbee, right? That's physically impossible. So that's what gives us this discontinuity or this kink once we've spent all of our time in leisure. Otherwise, this is a very standard budget constraint. And just to belabor this point for one moment further, and then I promise I will move on, we can turn this problem into a more general problem by saying you earn a wage of W dollars an hour, right? And you get an income from your uncle of, let's say, NLI for non-labor income per day. Then our budget would be C equals W times 24 minus L, right? Plus NLI. C plus WL equals 24 times W plus NLI, right? This is my total income. This is my price of leisure. This is my price of consumption. Wonderful.